Sunday, July 21st, 2019. Forecasted temperature is 53 degrees with partly cloudy skies. We left Akureyri at 8 p.m. last night and sailed west along the north side of Iceland. This morning we pulled into the port of Isafjordur at 8 a.m. Ísafjörður is a remote village in the far northwest region of Iceland with a population of around 2,500. It is a town that is usually overlooked by tourists to Iceland because it is a long way from the ring road. It is the capital of the West Fjords, Iceland's least populated region. It was originally settled by the Norwegian Vikings in the 9th century. Once again we had great weather. There was very little wind, so it was warm when standing in the sunlight. It was much cooler when standing around in the shade. In the morning, we took a boat ride across the fjord to the remote abandoned village of Hesteyri. There are no roads that lead to Hesteyri, and there is no outside source of electricity. The village was once used by the Norwegians for whale processing and later for fish processing. The town was abandoned around 1950. Descendants of the inhabitants still own some of the buildings and use them as summer cabins. The area is also a nature reserve that is popular with hikers and campers. Our tour guide took us on a walking tour of the area and talked about the history of the people who once lived here. Sue loved the flowers and orchids found growing wild in the fields. When you think of Iceland, you generally think of it as a giant volcanic rock, but the wildflowers grow everywhere and are very colorful. end of our walking tour, we had coffee and cake at a house that was owned by the doctor of the town. We spoke with the current owner of the doctor's house for a few minutes before heading back to our boat. We asked him about the difference between Norwegian and Icelandic, and if Iceland was settled by the Vikings, where did the Icelandic language come from? He said Icelandic is closer to the Old Norse language that Vikings would have spoken in Norway 1,000 years ago. Over the centuries, the two populations drifted apart. While Icelanders continued to speak the same language, the Norwegian language changed. We mentioned that the same thing happened to Norwegian immigrants in America. The Norwegian that was spoken by immigrants is the Norwegian from the 1800s, while the Norwegian spoken in Norway today is quite different. It was also interesting to learn about the ethnic makeup of Icelanders. You would think that since Iceland was originally settled by Norwegian Vikings, their DNA ancestry would be identical. That is not the case. Icelandic DNA is made up of a mixture of Norse and Gaelic descent. This is because the Vikings who sailed off to plunder other parts of Europe left their women behind in Norway. When they settled in Normandy, for example, they took the women from the local French population as their wives. The Vikings who settled Iceland first raided Scotland and Ireland and then took their women as captives to Iceland. Thus, while the DNA of a typical Norwegian today is mostly Scandinavian, Icelanders are a mix of Norwegian, Scottish, and Irish descent.